Running an event is hard. Running multiple city events on a 3-city cross-country tour can be even more challenging, obviously. Thankfully, it's a lot easier and more efficient when you do it together. J.K. Sparks, head of marketing at AudiencePlus, shares in today's episode exactly how they were able to go further faster by marketing together. He breaks down the logistics behind their efficient growth tour from San Francisco to Scottsdale to New York, how they pulled it all off with a complimentary virtual event series to boot, by identifying partners with a shared target audience and strategic narratives, operationalizing their promotion across several channels, and equipping individuals on each team to drive registrations to each stop on the tour. In the latter part of this conversation, JK actually shares a very tactical move you could implement if you're planning a co-sponsored event in a city where another conference is already taking place. He actually drove 15% of their registrations to one stop on the tour with the tactic that he shares here. All right, let's hear from JK about why they kicked off this event series in the first place and why they chose a near-bound approach by marketing with strategic partners to make the efficient growth tour even more, well, efficient.
Back in November, we're a small startup, by the way. We're about 10 employees right now. And we were less than a year old. And I thought, okay, we need to figure out a way to align ourselves with other brands that have, respect within our own marketplace and within our own audience that we're going after. And so what better way to do that than events? And basically, I brainstormed with Anthony, and we came up with the idea of doing a multi-stop tour in the spring. And so we started putting that plan together, went and found partners and just partners that were going to be aligned with the audience that we wanted. And that's pretty much how we came to it. And then went out in search of those, and everything came together, and we started promoting it in late January and started the first stop March 1 in Scottsdale, Arizona.
You mentioned looking for partners who were targeting a similar persona, a similar ICP. You guys focus on the in-house B2B marketers that are trying to build a media property, build an owned audience. So
Right.
Tell me a little bit about what that selection process was. Did you basically, as you and Anthony were talking about, hey, let's do this event series. Okay, it's very easy to come up with 6, 7, 8 names, and they all said yes. Did you pitch more people? Did you have to use any tools or any audience research to maybe find some sponsors that surprised you? What was that selection and that pitching process to find the partners to get involved with this event series? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we put together a pitch deck, and then we basically leveraged our networks, right? So, I think that's a key starting point for anyone that wants to do any co-marketing is go to your network, find the friendlies. And I've been friends with the Mutiny folks for a while now. I was one of their earlier customers years ago, been a multiple customer at multiple different companies. So just gotten to know that team really well over the years, and they have a very similar shared audience. They're primarily, CMOs, demand marketers. And so I went to Ryan, their head of marketing, and said, hey, this is what we're planning on doing, showed him the pitch deck and everything, and he was super bought in. So that was the first one that we partnered up with. And then we basically went out and like I said, pitched other partners. And then we ended up landing on Clearbit. So the thought process there was we wanted it to be 3, non-competitive, obviously, products. And so the story we wanted to tell was efficient growth, because right now, efficient growth is everything, right? So growth at all costs is completely dead. And so it was this whole idea of create, distribute, convert. And, Clearbit came out to be a really great partner because of knowing who you're creating for. So creating that ICP, and then creating your content around that. Distribute, which is AudiencePlus, and then convert, which is Mutiny. And so we were able to talk about our subject matter to a specific audience and tell a story across all of that. So I think it ended up being pretty compelling for the audience because they were hearing a multi-step process, not just like one specific thing.
That's really cool. So complementary companies going to friendly, so you have a better chance when you go in with that pitch, however you're going to structure it. I want to get to that in a second. Like, was it, hey, pay this and this is what you get? Were you asking them for certain things as opposed to, just full sponsorship dollars, or were there a few different options? Curious to get into the nitty gritty there. But one thing, I love the way that you were talking about, hey, this is the theme of the show and these are the three elements. We basically have a vendor or a product, a company representing each of those three. Did that kind of come together after these conversations, or was it, hey, we want these three, and then you went and got them specifically because of those?
Yeah, so I mean, we picked efficient growth, and I guess I left this context out earlier, but we picked efficient growth just because of like the timeliness of it, right? I mean, everybody was talking about it end of last year, early this year. And we wanted to tell a story through it for sure. So we wanted the complementary element, like you said. And that's kind of how we landed on that, just because we knew it would be the most compelling. And it's going to be like very relevant for our audience across all three of those elements. So it was strategic from the beginning, I would say. It wasn't something that necessarily came together as we were building out the partners, but to answer your first question, we had the partners, we basically gave them like the layout of what we were doing for the main co-sponsors. So we wanted to find like two peers essentially that were willing to come along with us, like share cost, speak at the event, right? Like have a subject that they're going to talk about, have a presence, like an in-person presence at each event to help us set up the event, all that kind of thing. And so we laid that out like in the pitch deck of like, hey, here's the expectations from you, here's the expectations from us, like amount of registrations we're going to drive, and if you're going to be in person and all of those things. So that was like very much set from the very beginning, and we were looking for peers, I guess is the best way to put it, in this case.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I think the setting of expectations, and being very clear about that, like I think some people, when it comes to marketing together, they don't necessarily want to share, hey, this is what we expect, either because they want the partner to really bring everything to the table. And if they say, hey, this is what we're going to drive, like, are they going to put enough behind it? Because we feel like, oh, they'll be happy with just the number. Or maybe we're a little bit ashamed because we're kind of, punching above our weight a little bit by asking for, a partner who maybe has a bigger audience, and we're like, they're going to be less inclined. But maybe speak to that. What are some of the specifics that you guys shared that maybe people shy away from in trying to pitch a co-sponsor or a partner for an event series like this, or webinar, or whatever the case might be, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most critical pieces was just registration, like the amount of registration you're going to drive. So they could sign up for, from the beginning, the promotional schedule, right? Which we can get into a little bit later, but like having a coordinated promotion schedule from all of the sponsors is important. And so making sure they're aware, like, hey, you are going to need to, help sponsor, help distribute, help promote. You're going to need to drive this many in registration, like, and we're holding ourselves to that standard too. So like we are equals here. And also, like, if they're going to have a speaking engagement, right? So whether that's going to be them getting customers, like we had one of our partners brought customers and did like a customer roundtable essentially at one of them, and it was really, really strong. And then at one of the other stops, that same partner, they did a keynote. So like it just depended on the stop we were at. We changed the content slightly depending on that, which was really cool.
You guys also had kind of another layer of partners. How did you kind of identify those versus the main ones? And did you find that structure worked well with having kind of different people involved in different roles as you pulled out this event series?
I will say this just real quick because I think it's important. Like, we did change up some of the stuff at each event, content-wise, but like we kept the same structure. So like the playbook was really easy to run in each city because we knew timing, we knew like cadence, we knew everything we needed, right? And And then what we would do is like we would just slot in like a different speaking topic or a different speaker into like the different areas. But that kept it like super streamlined and super efficient and easy for us to run. So I will say like that is kind of a key important piece. Otherwise, you're doing like a whole new event every stop if you're going to do some sort of like rip show, right? And then I would say for the sponsorships. So I would say like in all of it, we were looking for a shared audience. Like we want this to be relevant to everyone that we're going after, right? And so any sponsor that's involved, their audience mattered. And so we actually had some inbound interest too. Like once we were, you know, kind of promoting it and stuff, we had some inbound like, hey, can I get involved with this from certain brands? And we didn't have spots for all of them, but like some of them we added in. And we basically added like a media sponsor tier where they were represented. So like Sweetfish Media would be a good example for this because they were at all three of the in-person events. And so they paid a fee. They were able to be there in person and network. We did executive dinners at each stop. And so like they had seats at the table at the executive dinner. And they essentially were like represented there. And, you know, they brought like swag items and stuff like that too to give out at the event. And by the way, these were about 100 people per stop. So they weren't tiny, but they weren't huge. And then for the virtual, we did a virtual stop to kind of cap everything off. And for that, we had just like a bunch of media sponsors that had shared audiences who were super interested into it. It was really cool because we had that be the last stop. So like, as we were promoting this and people were talking about it throughout 3 in-person stops, we had like a lot of inbound interest from other external brands. And we ended up adding several of those in, and then they helped promote, they spoke at it. We had a roundtable session at the end of the virtual, which is a little bit different than the in-person. And so each one of the media sponsors were able to run a roundtable around a topic that they wanted to talk about. And then the audience could join those, you know, however they wanted to. So I think that was really powerful having like the media sponsors on like just a lower tier. It's same as like, you know, a big event, right? You have like your platinum or gold sponsors, and then you have like your silver and bronze and all of that. So we just simplified it essentially. And we had 2 levels. We had like our strategic ones, and then we had our media sponsors.
You have these different levels and you've got partner sponsors, but it's not just, hey, pay us this, drive some registrations, and your logo will be there. Like you're involving them in the content planning, and not just, hey, we'll give you a speaker slot, right? You guys got creative with it. Like, hey, this media sponsor is going to run a roundtable discussion and they're going to have some input on what the content's going to be and those sorts of things. Obviously, I work for a project management platform, SaaS tool. So I'm glad to hear like you guys had a framework, had a system for executing it, and then you had the variables within that. And I know you're a very operationally minded marketer, so that doesn't surprise me. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, JK, is, you know, you're talking about these different folks like a Clearbit, Mutiny, Sweetfish that have a shared audience. They're both going after in-house B2B marketers a lot in SaaS. The other thing I'm thinking about is you and Anthony and the AudiencePlus team have some very strong points of view. You guys have developed, I think, a strong strategic narrative around what is the shift in the market, why you need to build an owned audience, you know, kind of what is the enemy there, right? Building on rented land, those sorts of things. How much does that come into play when you're starting to especially market together with multiple other partners who might be aligned with the audience that they're going after? There might be some shared POVs, but there's gonna be some differences, right? It can be like, hey, unless you're really towing this line of this is the message that we're saying, that's kind of one end of the spectrum of the way you could approach this. Or, hey, let's kind of debate in public a little bit. If you guys have a different point of view on this piece of it, rented versus owned audience, those sorts of things. How did that come into play? Any stories there or any thoughts on how you guys approach that?
Honestly, in this one, I would say we were all pretty in agreement.
Okay.
Just because like we all agree, you know, that you need to have targeting in place, right? Like you need to know your ICP, you need to know who you're creating for, who you're distributing to, all of that. And so like Clearbit was a good fit because they help you understand, or they help you build your ICP, I should say, right? And so like that was their topic. That's what they talked about. And obviously Mutiny and AudiencePlus, like we agree with that. We agree with like very targeted marketing. And then like the distribution piece and like the owned audience, I think we're all in agreement, like rented land isn't where you want to build your foundation. Like, it's fine to like distribute there, but you should always like have a way to drive back to your owned database, your owned audience, and make sure that you're building that up. I mean, like, I think Threads is like a good example in a way, because it's like, here's a brand new social media platform. Now you're not starting from scratch, which is kind of unique, right? Like you have that Instagram audience already. But it's just like the concept of like, oh, a new social media platform came out. Now I have to spend time there as well. And then it's like, what if, like, is this other rented platform going to die that I spent all these years trying to build on, and like not spending the time to build my own audience? So like that works across the board, from like solopreneur to enterprise B2B SaaS company, right? So I think we were all in agreement around that. And then conversion, I mean, if you're not converting demand that you're creating, then it's pointless. So I think like we all were in agreement with Muni's point of view of like, hey, having these like personalized experiences to help drive your conversion and increase your website conversion, so that you're catching like more of that 97% of traffic that's bouncing, is super critical. So in this specific case, we were all pretty much in agreement. There was some interesting conversations that would like pop up at like the exec dinners and stuff, where we would be talking and like there might be some opposing points of view, but everybody was like cordial and professional. And we debated it, and like it was great conversation. So I thought like the networking was really powerful at those.
So when we're talking about some of your main partners in this event series, they didn't necessarily have opposing points of view. They had complementary, but they help you like, oh, we're not necessarily talking about the importance of targeting. Like that's another point of view that we could weave into our strategic narrative to bolster that and make it stronger. Now we have another POV that we can be talking about that overlaps with this POV. Now we're actually surrounding the market and bringing them back in with that narrative around an ode audience even stronger, right? I've been talking about this idea of like going from inbound marketing where we have our magnet to nearbound where we're partnering with other people, and the collective pull power of that magnet is drawing people in. I think how you guys have continued to iterate on your points of view and your strategic narrative with that iron sharpens iron from your partners is a good example of that. What comes to mind for you?
Well, yeah, and we did it. We structured it intentionally. Like Clearbit had their session, and then AudiencePlus, and then Mutiny, and then we had a closing session to kind of like wrap everything together. In that closing session, we would find typically a local like industry luminary. So we had Udi Lettergore from Gong in San Francisco. We had Ryan Benici. He's at GemPass now, but he was at G2, right, in New York. And then in Scottsdale, we actually did a panel of local CMOs. So we had Chris Kohler from Box, and then Karen Steele from Sendoso. So that was really nice to like wrap everything up. And that was like, that slot was there for every city, but we like switched up the content a little bit, right? And made it more relevant for like the local place that we were at. But back to like the narrative, like it built on itself, because like Clearbit talked about ICP, and whether they were doing a keynote or a round or like a fireside chat or a panel, because they did all of those things, talking about like the importance of building your correct ICP so you know who you're going after. Then it goes straight into distribution, right? Like, well, if you're not owning your audience and distributing to the proper audience, then like
you're not going to build a good owned audience. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then like Mutiny talking about converting demand on your website. It's like, well, if you're not targeting the right people from the very top of your marketing efforts, then like you're not going to convert them anyways. So it was kind of like it built on itself, and it told a story, I think, for the audience. And so we had like audience retention was really high. We had a few people leave here and there who like, for example, well, actually, and this is something we need to talk about too, is like ancillary events, basically. So like or tangential events, like making sure you could like, if you want to do an in-person experience, you can like piggyback off of a larger event that's happening. So we can talk about that in a sec. But yeah, like our audience retention was amazing, because like it was a progressive content series. And I think people wanted to stick around because they were like, oh, I'm learning some things. Oh, there's some like tactical application I can have here. Here's some theory, like, and they walked away with, actionable things.
Yeah, and I love the way that you guys picking the right partners allowed you to create content that told a story that had a natural progression, which I think is a big part of why you guys saw that retention.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise it's random. Like it becomes random, and then you're like just another B2B SaaS event where it's like, I'm going to go down this track over here, and like the content isn't necessarily complementary.
JK, you mentioned something there just a second ago about piggybacking on other events. I know we're focusing on the partnership-led approach in this, but for events, since we're talking about that today, tactically, tell me a little bit about this idea of piggybacking on other events or tangential events and how that helped you and your partners drive some more audience to this tour.
Yeah, so when we were picking the cities, San Francisco and New York were pretty obvious, especially San Francisco, right? Like given the audience. But with the third city, we were like, man, where do we go? Like Austin could be cool. But B2B was happening in Scottsdale. Anthony is from he lives in Scottsdale, or near Scottsdale. And so we had like a local presence there also, like as a team. And so we were thinking, well, that'd be cool. Like, let's just piggyback off of B2B because it's one of the bigger, B2B marketing events in the entire industry. And so we knew a bunch of marketers were going to be there. And so we were able to go and market towards people that were going to B2B and drive them towards the Efficient Growth Tour. And then I did some guerrilla marketing tactic, I guess. And I attended B2B and so I went to the first couple days of that, and then our event was at the end of the last day. So we weren't competing. Like, it wasn't like the attendees had to decide, oh no, am I going to go to B2BMX or I'm going to go to the Efficient Growth Tour? We were at the end, so they could just come afterwards. And there were some pros and cons to that, I will say. Like, people were tired, right? But people still came. Like, we had a great show rate. But while I was at the event, I had these little cards, like business cards printed, that said the Efficient Growth Tour, you're invited, had the location, had a QR code to register. And I was just handing those out to like everybody that I met. And we had a bunch of people come and give the card for a ticket. So by the way, these were paid events, which we can also talk about if you want to, and the strategy behind that. But the card was a free ticket. So like you had to present the card to like get the free ticket. So then I knew how many people actually showed up from those. And we were able to count it up at the end. And we had like 12 or 14 people, something like that, show up just from like conversations at B2BMX.
Doesn't sound huge, but like that's 15%. If you're, each of these was about 100 people or something, that's not nothing. That's for sure. And I like your little way of kind of offline acquisition tracking there. That was smart. A little attribution conversation. We could go down a rabbit hole, but we won't for now. Let's talk a little bit about the promo schedule and involving the individuals from your partners in that promotion. So let's talk about just operationally, there's kind of different approaches different people take here. Hey, as a marketing team, we're on this project management tool, come into this, or they handle it all back and forth via email, or let's spin up a shared Slack channel